22nd of December, 1944. 03 hours 15 minutes, 6 kilometers south of Sankt Vith, Belgian Ardennes. In a converted cattle barn that reeked of hay, blood, and carbolic acid, Dr. Wilhelm Brandt pressed scalpel number 7 against the exposed femur of a 19-year-old Gefreiter whose leg had been shredded by shrapnel. The boy's eyes, wide, pleading, morphine dulled but not unconscious, locked onto Brandt's face. "Will I walk again, Herr Doctor?" He whispered. "No." Brandt didn't answer. He couldn't. Because at that precise moment, an American 155mm artillery shell detonated 212 meters from the barn's eastern wall, close enough that the wooden operating table bucked beneath his hands, close enough that dust cascaded from rafters onto the open wound, close enough that the kerosene lamp overhead swung violently, throwing monstrous shadows across walls slick with condensation and fear. The boy screamed. Brandt's hands, T.O., trembling not from terror, but from 22 hours of continuous surgery, kept cutting. This was the 43rd soldier. What Dr. Wilhelm Brandt did not know, could not have known as he worked by failing lamplight while the Western Front collapsed around him, was that he had 57 more to go. 57 more men who would pass through his hands before his body gave out. 57 more impossible decisions before scalpel number 7, the only instrument that would survive intact. Final. Lie clattered to the blood-soaked floor. This is the story of 100 surgeries performed under bombardment. This is the story of a number that should have been impossible. Can safely perform 6 to 8 major trauma procedures per 12-hour shift before efficacy degrades below acceptable standards. The mathematics were clear, backed by studies from university hospitals in Berlin and Munich. 6 to 8 surgeries per shift, maximum. Yet within 18 months, field reports would document cases that defied every protocol, every statistical model, every assumption about human endurance. Dr. Wilhelm Brandt had been a civilian surgeon in Frankfurt before Consi. Riptian, 38 years old, married, 2 daughters aged 9 and 6, specialized in thoracic procedures. His peacetime record showed 63 surgeries in his best month, roughly 3 per working day, scheduled, in sterile operating theaters with teams of 6 nurses and unlimited supplies. Clean, controlled, civilized. When he received mobilization orders in March of 1944, his wife Anna had pressed his hand across their kitchen table. "You save lives, Wilhelm. That won't change." But everything had changed. By December, he was in the Ardennes, assigned to Kampfgruppe Steiner's medical detachment, a unit assembled from remnants of 3 decimated divisions. The hospital was a barn. His team was 2 exhausted orderlies and 1 nurse. Schwester Margareta Holzer, 51 years old, who had worked non-stop beside him for 3 days. His supplies were whatever could be scrounged from captured American depots and dwindling Wehrmacht stores. Die impossible before the operation began. German forces launching the Ardennes offensive in mid-December had fuel for perhaps 150 kilometers of advance. American forces defending had fuel for unlimited retreat and countermaneuver. Oberst Friedrich Kessler, fictional commander of the Kampfgruppe, had studied the logistics reports and understood immediately. He confided to his staff on December 14th, "We have ammunition for 1 week of intensive combat. The Americans can sustain bombardment indefinitely. Every hour we remain in contact, the mathematics become more unfavorable." Yet orders were orders. The offensive launched on December 16th. Within 48 hours, Brandt's field hospital received its first wave of wounded, 12 men on the first day, 18 on the second. By December 21st, as American artillery found their range and began systematic interdiction of German supply routes, the barn had become a magnet for casualties. They arrived on foot, on stretchers improvised from doors and blankets dragged by comrades through snow and shell fire. Every explosion brought more, and Dr. Wilhelm Brandt operated. Supposed to take over the farm. Do you think another shell? Closer this time, 170 meters. The barn shuddered. Brandt's scalpel slipped, nicked the femoral artery. Blood sprayed. He clamped it with fingers that had sutured 42 previous arteries in the last day, found the bleeder, tied it off with precious catgut that was running low. "Hold still," he ordered unnecessarily. Coke was strapped down, couldn't move even if he wanted to. Brandt extracted 3 pieces of shra. Pinole, the largest the size of a thumbnail, hot and jagged, and dropped them into a metal bowl where they clinked against dozens of others. He could feel exhaustion like a physical weight on his shoulders, a fog creeping into his peripheral vision. But the surgery required 13 more minutes. 13 minutes of cutting away devitalized tissue, of identifying and preserving major vessels and nerves, of closing muscle and fascia and skin with sutures that had to be tight enough to prevent infectu, on but loose enough to allow drainage. When he finally tied off the last stitch and Schwesterholzer began bandaging, Brandt allowed himself one deep breath. One moment of respite. Then the orderly called from the doorway, "Herr Doctor, 6 more arriving." Even men pulled from the edge of death. Hauptmann Rolf Dietz, fictional medical logistics officer, had calculated the supply consumption and written in his duty log, "At current rate, morphine depleted in 14 hours, sulfa powder in 18, surgical sutures in 22 hours, bandages already being improvised from bed linens and parachute silk." Yet the wounded kept arriving, and Brandt kept operating. Because what else could he do? Turn them away? Watch them die? The American artillery had established a methodical pattern. They fired missions every 12 to 17 minutes, walking shells in a grid pattern that covered every approach to the German positions. The barn, marked with red crosses painted on canvas sheets spread across the roof, should have been protected by Geneva Convention. Should have been. But accuracy in counter-battery fire was imperfect, and near misses were common. Each explosion rattled instruments, toppled supply crates, sent patients and staff diving faux ER cover. Except Brandt. He learned quickly that stopping mid-surgery was more dangerous than continuing through the barrage. An open abdomen couldn't wait for shelling to cease. An exposed artery didn't care about near misses. Ning in his own blood, lips blue, breathing in shallow gasps. Brandt knelt beside him without ceremony, without preamble. Scalpel number 7 cut between the 4th and 5th ribs. No time for proper sterile procedure. No time for careful dissection. He thrust his gloved finger into the pleural cavity and felt the rush of trapped air hissing out, felt the lung begin to re-expand. Bauer gasped, color returning to his face in seconds. "Danke," he managed. "Danke, Herr Doctor." Brandt inserted a rubber tube, cut from an old gas mask hose, sterilized as best as possible, and sutured it in place to maintain drainage. The entire procedure took 6 minutes. Textbooks would have called it butchery. But Bauer would survive to be evacuated, would live to return to his family in Stuttgart. In war, perfection was a luxury. Function was all that mattered. As Brandt stood, knees cracking, he noticed Schwesterholzer watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Later, much later, she would tell interviewers. He was already moving like a machine by that point, efficient, relentless. I think something had switched off in his mind, the part that felt fatigue, that felt doubt. He just continued, keeping mental count of supplies because the numbers were too discouraging. They were down to improvisation and prayer. Morphine was gone by surgery number 53. Brandt switched to local anesthesia, then to nothing at all for minor procedures. He operated on conscious men who bit leather straps and screamed. He operated on unconscious men who had passed out from shock and might never wake. He operated on men who begged him to let them die, and on men who begged him to save limbs that could not be saved. Each decision took seconds. Each choice was final. Obergefreiter Karl Schneider, patient number 62, had taken shrapnel through the right eye, fragments driven deep into orbital socket and sinus cavity. The eye was destroyed, but the fragments had to be removed or infection would spread to brain. Schneider was conscious, had refused to scream, jaw clenched so tightly Brandt feared he'd crack teeth. "Talk to me," Brandt ordered as he worked, probing with forceps in tissue that WW2 blood and clear fluid. Tell me about home. Schneider, voice tight. Small town, Rothenburg, medieval walls, beautiful in summer. Brandt extracted the first fragment. Schneider's entire body went rigid. Keep talking. My wife, Greta, blonde, laughs too loud in church. Another fragment. Schneider made a sound like an animal caught in wire. Children? 2 boys, 5 and 7. Play soldiers. Don't understand. The largest fragment came free, and with it, a gush of infection that stank even in the barn's atmosphere of rot and disinfectant. Brandt packed the cavity with sulfa-impregnated gauze, one of the last packets, and bandaged the socket. You'll live, he said. You'll see your boys again. Schneider's remaining eye focused on him. Thank you, Herr Doctor. Thank you. But there was no time for gratitude. Number 63 was already on the table. On minutes. Feldwebel Otto Krause, the senior orderly, kept a log because someone had to document what was happening, had to bear witness. His entries from the early morning of December 22nd read like fever dream. 0830 hours, patient 70. Abdominal wound. Doctor worked for 27 minutes. Shell struck 50 meters distant. Nobody paused. 0915 hours, patient 73. Bilateral leg fractures. Doctor has not eaten in 16 hours. Refuses food. SE. A's hands must remain steady. 0942 hours, patient 76. Doctor's eyes are bloodshot. Hands still working. I don't understand how. 100 meters. The nearest shell so far. Part of roof collapsed. We dragged wounded away from debris. Doctor continued surgery on table 6 meters away. Didn't look up. The pattern was clear to anyone watching. Brandt had entered a state beyond ordinary endurance. Psychologists would later theorize about the mechanisms: adrenaline, dissociation, hyperfocus born of extreme necessity. But in the moment, it was simply incomprehensible. A man operating with hands that shook, eyes that could barely focus, a body running on fumes and will. Patient number 81 was Lieutenant Hermann Graf, a junior officer who had taken machine gun fire across the chest. 3 entry wounds, 2 exits. The middle bullet had lodged against the spine. Graf was conscious, surprisingly calm. How bad? He asked. Brandt probed with forceps, felt metal again. Anesthetic bone. Bad. The bullet is touching your spinal column. If I try to extract it, you might be paralyzed. If I leave it, infection will kill you in 3 days. Graf considered this with impressive composure. Your recommendation? Extract. 30% chance of paralysis. 70% chance you walk again. Then do it. The surgery took 41 minutes. Brandt's hands trembled so severely that twice he had to pause, press palms against the table, breathe deeply, then continue. The bullet was wedged between vertebrae, encased in swelling tissue. He dissected with exquisite care, every movement deliberate, working around nerves that controlled everything from waist down. When the bullet finally came free, a deformed 9mm round, he held it up for Graf to see. Souvenir, Brandt said. His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. Graf tried to move his toes. They flexed. Herr Doctor, Next patient, Brandt interrupted. Because there was always a next patient. Reached surgery number 90 at approximately 02 hours on December 23rd. Brandt had been operating for 30 hours with only 2 brief periods of rest. 10 minutes here, 15 there, sitting with back against the wall while orderlies prepared the next patient. Schwesterholzer had tried to force him to sleep. Wilhelm, you'll kill someone. You'll make a mistake. He'd looked at her with eyes that seemed to focus on something beyond the barn walls. If I stop, they die waiting. If I continue, some might live. The mathematics are clear. She had no answer to that. The 90th patient was a boy. Couldn't have been older than 17. With blast trauma so severe that Brandt knew immediately the prognosis was grim. Both legs mangled beyond repair, internal injuries extensive. Gefreiter Andreas Brandt, no relation, had been caught in a direct hit on his foxhole. That he was alive at all was testament to stubborn biology. "Am I going to make it?" the boy asked. His voice was small, childlike. Brandt looked at him for a long moment. In that moment, something cracked in the armor of dissociation he'd built. This boy, same last name, could have been his nephew, could have been any German family's son, was dying. Would die in the next 2 hours regardless of intervention. The honest answer was no. The merciful answer was sedation and comfort. But they had no morphine left, no sedatives, nothing to ease the transition. And there were 10 more patients waiting, 10 who might survive. Brandt made a decision that would haunt him for decades. "You're strong," he said. "We'll do everything possible." Then he turned to Holzer and whispered, "Make him comfortable. I can't help him." He moved to patient 91. Behind him, he heard the boy crying softly, heard Holzer's gentle voice offering what comfort words could provide. He didn't look back, couldn't look back, because if he did, if he allowed himself to feel the full weight of that choice, he would collapse, and there were still 9 more to save. Performed with a hand drill because there was no other option, releasing pressure that would have killed within hours. Feldwebel-Krause's log entries became shorter, more desperate. 0400 hours. Patient 99. Doctor barely standing, swaying, caught himself on table twice. Completed surgery anyway. 16 minutes. 0437 hours. 100th patient arriving. Dr. Brandt hasn't spoken in an hour except to give medical orders. I don't think he knows where he is anymore. The 100th soldier was Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, 24 years old, from Hamburg, married 3 months before deployment, shrapnel through the thigh, femoral artery compromised, massive blood loss. He was unconscious when they laid him on the table, the same table where this had all begun, where patient 43 had asked if he'd walk again. Brandt looked down at the wound, looked at scalpel number 7, still clutched in his right hand, blade dulled from use. Han. Still slippery with blood that had seeped through surgical gloves worn for 12 hours straight. He positioned the blade. His hands were shaking so badly the tip traced small circles in the air. He pressed down, began the incision. And then something happened that nobody in the barn had expected. Dr. Wilhelm Brandt, who had operated for 31 hours and 17 minutes without stopping, who had saved 99 men under conditions that should have been impossible, simply stopped function. His body, forehead striking the soldier's chest, and went absolutely still. Schwesterholzer screamed. Feldwebel-Krause dropped the tray of instruments he'd been holding and lunged forward, pulling Brandt's limp form away from the patient. For 10 terrible seconds, everyone thought the doctor was dead. Then Brandt drew a shuddering breath, then another. He was unconscious, simply unconscious. The human machine had finally, catastrophically, shut down. Holzer took over. Her hands shook. She was a new RS, not a surgeon, but she'd watched Brandt perform 99 surgeries. She'd learned. She completed the procedure on Klaus Richter with Krause assisting, fumbling through steps she'd seen Brandt execute with precision, praying that she remembered correctly. 28 minutes later, she tied off the final suture. Richter's pulse was steady. He would live. She looked down at Dr. Brandt, now lying on a stretcher in the corner, breathing deeply in sleep that resembled a coma more than rest. Then she looked at scalpel number 7, still on the floor where it had fallen, blade catching lamplight. She picked it up carefully, as if it were a religious relic. In a way, it was. Wilhelm Brandt had performed exactly 100 surgeries in 31 hours and 17 minutes. 100 men had passed through his hands. Of those 100, 87 survived long enough to be evacuated. 87. In field conditions, under bombardment, with dwindling supplies and zero support beyond 2 exhausted assistants. Oberst Friedrich Kessler, when informed of the achievement, initially refused to believe it. Impossible, he stated flatly. No human being can sustain the level of performance. The reports must be exaggerated. But the evidence was undeniable. Feldwebel-Krause's meticulously maintained log. Schwesterholzer's testimony. Most compelling of all, the soldiers themselves. 87 men who owed their lives to a doctor who had operated past the point of human endurance. Word spread through German lines with the speed of wildfire. In American prisoner of war interrogations conducted in January 1945, captured German soldiers repeatedly. I mentioned the doctor in the barn. Intelligence officers initially dismissed these accounts as propaganda or mythology. Then captured medical records corroborated the story. One interrogation transcript, declassified decades later, recorded the testimony of Gefreiter Hans Dieter Koch, patient number 43. I asked him if I would walk again. He didn't answer, just kept working while the shells fell. I thought we were all going to die, but he just wouldn't stop. When they evacuated me, 3 days later I heard he'd operated on 100 men. 100 in one night. I didn't believe it. Then I met 6 others in the field hospital. We compared notes. All operated on by Dr. Brandt. All in the same 30-hour period. That's when I understood. We'd witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. And 12 hours of surgery. Schwesterholzer sat beside him as memory slowly returned. His first words were, "How many?" She understood immediately what he was asking. 100, Herr Doctor. You operated on 100 soldiers. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with something Holzer described as devastating awareness. How many died? 13. 13 died either during or shortly after surgery. The boy, Andreas Brandt, passed 2 hours after you moved to the next patient. Wilhelm turned his face to the wall. I should have stayed with him. You saved 87 others. I should have stayed with him. This guilt would define the remainder of Brandt's life. In letters written to his wife Anna in January of 1945, he struggled to articulate what he'd experienced. I became something less than human, Anna, something mechanical. I stopped seeing them as men, as sons and husbands. They became problems to solve, wounds to close, blood to control. I saved 87, but I abandoned 13, and one boy, same name as mine, died crying for comfort I couldn't provide because I was already working on someone else. What does that make me? A hero, or a monster who chose efficiency over mercy? Anna's response, preserved in family archives, was characteristically clear-eyed. You became what war demanded. You became what 100 men needed you to be. The guilt you carry is the price of 87 lives saved. Yes, but would you trade it? Would you choose differently, knowing the outcome? Brandt never answered that question directly. American forces, drawing from depots in Liège and beyond, had access to effectively unlimited reserves. The ratio was approximately 1 German leader for every 47 American leaders. Ammunition expenditure. German artillery fired an average of 1,200 rounds per day. American artillery, once fully committed, fired 18,000 rounds per day. Ratio, 1 to 15. Medical supplies. German field hospitals received 1 resupply delivery every 72 to 96 hours, weather and roads permitting. American aid stations received daily replenishment. Ratio, effectively unmeasurable. Yet within this context of overwhelming material disadvantage, individual acts of extraordinary will had occurred. Dr. Brandt's 100 surgeries became emblematic of something larger, the human capacity to persist when mathematics screamed impossibility. Comparison studies conducted after the war revealed the stark disparity. Average American field hospital, December 9, 1844, 72-hour period. 4 surgeons on rotating shifts, 16 nurses, full pharmaceutical inventory, electricity, sterilization equipment. Surgeries performed, 147. Average surgical load per doctor, 37 procedures over 3 days. German field hospital, same period, at Brandt's location. 1 surgeon on continuous duty, 1 nurse, 2 orderlies, depleted supplies, kerosene lighting, bombardment every 8 to 15 minutes. Surgeries perfo. RUMD, 100. Surgical load, 100 procedures in 31 hours. Per hour comparison, American average, roughly 0.5 surgeries per hour per surgeon. Brandt's performance, 3.2 surgeries per hour, over 6 times the sustainable rate, for 31 continuous hours. Human fine motor control degrades significantly after 12 hours of continuous precise work. Cognitive decision-making suffers after 18 hours without sleep. Physical collapse typically occurs between 24 and 36 hours of sustained high-stress activity. Brandt had operated at peak efficiency, life-or-death decisions, microscopically precise movements, for 31 hours. He had shattered every known performance ceiling. Dr. James Patterson, fictional American military surgery. Gian, interviewed in 1963 about comparative performance, offered this assessment. What the German doctor accomplished was medically inexplicable. We studied cases of extreme endurance, marathon surgeries during mass casualty events. The longest verified continuous surgery on record was 18 hours, a team of 3 surgeons rotating who was primary, working on a single complicated case with full support. Brandt performed 100 separate surgeries, alone, in 31 hours. Under bombardment, with failing supplies. It shouldn't be possible. The human body has limits. He exceeded all of them. Yet he had. The evidence was irrefutable. 87 men lived who should have died. Tanning Brandt's field hospital received 847 individual shell impacts within a 1-kilometer radius, 847 explosions in 48 hours. Average interval, 3.4 minutes between impacts. Closest near miss, 41 meters from the barn. Several shells had struck close enough to collapse portions of the roof, to shatter windows, to send shrapnel through walls. Yet the barn itself, marked clearly with Red Cross insignia, was never directly hit. Whether this was American artillery discipline respecting Geneva Convention or simple statistical fortune or something else entirely, remains debated. What is undebatable? Dr. Wilhelm Brandt operated through 847 explosions without stopping. The psychological impact on patients was documented in numerous accounts. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, patient 100, the soldier on the table when Brandt collapsed, recovered consciousness on December 24th. When informed that the doctor had completed his surgery before collapsing, Richter's response was recorded. "I remember nothing. They tell me I was the 100th, the final surgery before he fell. I owe him my life. But more than that, I owe him the knowledge that even when the world is ending, even when mathematics says all is lost, someone will fight impossibility itself to save one more. Just one more. Until there is literally nothing left to give." This sentiment echoed through countless testimonies. Wester Margareta Holzer, who had carried it through the remainder of the war, later donated to the museum with a simple note. "This instrument saved 100 lives. It deserves to be remembered." The museum display is modest. A glass case, the scalpel resting on black velvet, a brass plaque. Surgical scalpel, December 1944, used by Dr. Wilhelm Brandt, medical officer during 31 hours of continuous surgery under bombardment. 100 soldiers operated upon, 7 saved. Visitors often ask the elderly docent, a volunteer who gives tours twice weekly, how such a thing was possible, how one man, with one instrument, accomplished what should have been impossible. The docent's answer has become ritual. The mathematics were clear. 6 to 8 surgeries per shift was the maximum recommended. Dr. Brandt performed 100 in less than 2 shifts. He exceeded every known limit of human performance. When asked years later how he did it, he said, "I didn't think about 100. I thought about one, just one more, and then one more after that, until there was no more." The docent pauses, letting visitors absorb this, then adds, "The scalpel is important, but what it represents is more important. The capacity of the human will to reject mathematical impossibility when lives depend on it." Civilian surgery, to scheduled procedures in clean hospitals with full staff and unlimited supplies. But he was never the same. Anna wrote in her personal journal entry from April 1946, "Wilhelm is home, physically intact, mentally changed. He wakes screaming twice a week. Always the same nightmare. He's operating and the patient dies, and when he looks down, it's our daughters on the table. He's stopped listening to radio, can't bear loud noises. Thunder sends him into dark mood. Diaz that last days, but he operates, returns to surgery. I asked him why. Why go back to work that traumatizes him? He said, Because I'm good at it. Because people live when I work. The nightmares are the price. Small price for that. He never spoke publicly about the 100 surgeries, refused interviews, declined military honors. When pressed, he would say only, "I did what was necessary. Others would have done the same." But this was false humility. Others had not done the same. Could he have done the same? Of the thousands of medical officers who served on all sides during World War II, none matched the feat. The record stands alone, unchallenged, unchallengeable. Dr. Wilhelm Brandt died in 1979, aged 73, of heart failure. At his funeral, 6 men attended who had not been expected. They were strangers to the family. They stood apart from other mourners. After the service, they approached Anna with quiet dignity. The eldest spoke. "We are 6 of the 87. We learned of Dr. Brandt's passing and came to pay respects. He saved our lives 40 years ago. We wanted his family to know. We lived because of him. We had children because of him. We grew old because of him. He gave us decades we would not have had. We thought he should be remembered not as he saw himself, but as we saw him. As the man who refused to stop when stopping would have been reasonable. Who worked until his body betrayed him. Who saved one more and then one me. Or until there were no more to save. Lived. Mathematics of mercy. The living outweigh the dead, but the dead are never forgotten. Never. This, perhaps, is the truest summary of the event. Not a story of heroism, though heroism was certainly present. Not a story of medical miracle, though the achievement defied medical understanding. Rather, a story of mathematics and will in collision. The mathematics said, impossible. One surgeon cannot perform 100 surgeries in 31 hours, cannot maintain precision under bombardment, cannot save 87 of 100 under field conditions with depleted supplies. The will said, watch, and proved the mathematics wrong. The lesson endures. In modern military medicine, in trauma surgery protocols, in studies of human performance under extreme stress, the case of Dr. Wilhelm Brandt remains singular. A marker of what can be accomplished when necessity and skill and stubborn refusal to quit align perfectly. When one more becomes a mantra. When the mathematics of impossibility meet the arithmetic of compassion. 100 soldiers, 31 hours, 1 scalpel, 87 lives. The numbers tell the story, but they cannot capture the totality, cannot convey the weight of scalpel number 7 growing heavier with each surgery. Cannot describe the sound of artillery falling closer while hands work inside a human body. Cannot replicate the moment when a surgeon's body finally betrays him, and he falls, having given literally everything. These things exist, B.O. in mathematics, in the realm of human capacity that we measure only by its outcomes. And the outcome was this. 87 men went home. 87 families remained whole. 87 futures unfolded that would have ended in a Belgian barn in December of 1944. This is what one man accomplished when he decided that impossible was simply a number to exceed. One surgery at a time, until there was nothing left. Until scalpel number 7 fell from hand, finally too exhausted to hold it. Until 100 became not a limit, but a testament.